I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean in my soul.
Before we begin with our opening words, I'd like to welcome all visitors this morning. It's great to have you with us. Our opening words are from Henry David Thoreau in a letter he wrote to Ralph Waldo Emerson, March 11, 1842. Both are Unitarians. Death is beautiful when seen to be a law and not an accident. It is as common as life. Every blade in the field, every leaf in the forest lays down its life and its season as beautifully as it was taken up. It is the pastime of a quarter of the year. So it is with the human plant. We are partial and selfish when we lament the death of an individual, unless our complaint be a joyful praise to the departed soul, and a sigh as the wind sighs over the fields, which no shrub interprets into its private grief.
Come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, blowing the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Root on your coast, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
This morning our joys and sorrows will be presided over by Pastoral Care Member Jan Parsons.
Good morning. This is the time in our service when we come together to share those joys and sorrows that have entered our lives over the last week or so. We always start by remembering those who can't be with us today. We also remember those in military service, their families, and those especially deployed. If you wish to share.
Once E brought in a video and a recording of Thich Nhat Hanh singing and speaking a meditation called The End of Suffering. My understanding is that he had a friend who was in prison and that he wrote this musical piece as an offering of consolation for his friend. And all of us who heard it were very haunted by it. The video version of this is on YouTube if you decide to look it up. This is called The End of Suffering. And I think it relates a great deal to our sermon this morning. And now I'd like to turn it over to Thich Nhat Hanh. He'll be singing in Vietnamese, and then he'll be speaking to you in English over music. And now meditation master Thich Nhat Hanh.
Prayer for guidance, for direction, for a sign. And in return, a vow to one day build a shrine in the name of all who are hopeless. This was the beginning, quiet and solemn. But soon, this sacred vow would become a mission. As the light from that single candle grew into a torch of promise, passed through time and generations to millions around the world. As that vision took form,
May the sound of this bell penetrate deep into the cosmos. Even in the darkest spots, living beings are able to hear it clearly, so that all suffering in them cease, understanding come to their heart, and they transcend the path of sorrow and death.
Nguyện người nghe tình thức
nẻo đau buồn. The universal Dharma door is already open. The sound of the rising tide is heard clearly. The miracle happens. A beautiful child appears in the heart of a lotus flower. One single drop of this compassionate water is enough to bring back the refreshing spring to our mountains and rivers. Nghe chuông phiền não tan mây khói, lặng thân an miệng mỉm cười. Hơi thở nương chuông về chánh niệm, vườn tâm hoa tuệ xin tươi. Listening to the bell, I feel the afflictions in me begin to dissolve. My mind calm, my body relaxed. A smile is born on my lips. Following the sound of the bell, my breath brings me back to the safe island of mindfulness. In the garden of my heart, the flowers of peace bloom beautifully. Phổ môn vọng tiếng, tiểu dưng bé thơ xuất hiện giữa lòng đóa sen. Cơm lộ một giọt rưới lên xuân về trên khắp mọi miền núi sông. Phổ môn vọng tiếng, tiểu dưng bé thơ xuất hiện giữa lòng đóa sen. Cơm lộ một giọt rưới lên xuân về trên khắp mọi miền núi sông. Tiếng chuông huyền diệu đưa về nhất tâm.
Thank you, Thich Nhat Hanh. Yesterday I was having a burger at O'Charlie's, and our waitress, she had a t-shirt on, and when she turned around, the t-shirt said, "If you're waiting on God, do what waiters do, serve." This is a congregation which is a welcoming and independent congregation. We're welcoming to people of all genders and sexual orientations, people of all races, different backgrounds, anyone who is in line with our vision and our values is welcome here. This is a generous church. Generosity is one of our spiritual aspirations, one of our principles. And we're an independent church. We finance all of our own programs and situations independently so that we don't have to be influenced by political or outside organizations. We need you at this time to be generous. For our Sunday offering, please see the link where you can pay by PayPal or credit card. Thank you.
Any sermon on the subject of the human right to die should tell a true story. Derek, I simply don't want to go on living like this. It's been pretty bad this week, and I want you to do something for me so that if I decide I want to die, I can do it on my own terms and exactly when I choose. The one thing that worries me is that I won't be in any position to make the right decision. What with my being knocked senseless by all these drugs? I might be too daft to know whether I'm doing the right thing or not. But I shall have a good idea when I've had enough of the pain. So I want you to promise me that when I ask you if this is the right time to kill myself, you will give me an honest answer, one way or another. And we must understand, you and I, that I will not do it immediately. You won't question my right, and you will give me the means to do it. I considered for a moment, knowing that if we could exchange positions, I would make the same request. I'll do whatever you ask. 9 months after making our pact, Jean's condition worsened dramatically. The doctors found the cancer had invaded most of her bones and attacked her lungs, kidneys, and bloodstream. Throughout her illness, the consultant had repeatedly said, "We've a long way to go yet." Now Jean turned to him and asked his opinion. "There's nothing more I can do," he responded honestly. "Then let's give up trying and let me go home to die," she said. On Easter Saturday, after we'd had breakfast together and we were sitting looking out the window into the garden, she called to me softly, "Derek, is this the day?" I had difficulty finding voice to reply. "Yes, my darling, it is. How shall it be?" she asked. I said that a doctor friend of mine in London had provided me some drugs, which were quite lethal, and she had only to take them. After a few moments, Jean spoke again. I shall die at 1 o'clock. We spent the morning together, holding each other and speaking of the future and the past, our sons, and our 21 years together. When she observed that it was time, I mixed the drugs into a cup of coffee and returned to her bedside. We said our goodbye, and then she lifted the mug and drank its content fully. She leaned back on her pillow, closing her eyes, and fell fast asleep, the drugs taking immediate effect. Soon, her breathing became slow and heavy. For the next hour, I sat beside her, keeping watch as she died. This is the story of Jean Humphrey. It is from a book written by her husband, Derek, who has since moved from London to Los Angeles and now lives in Eugene, Oregon. While in Los Angeles, he became a co-founder of the Hemlock Society. The Society's aim is to support the option of active, voluntary euthanasia for the terminally ill. Both my parents chose this option. My mother died 14 years ago. She was wheelchair bound and was never to get out of the wheelchair, and she decided to stop eating. And she called me up, and I was in Maryland at the time, and my mother was living in North Carolina, to arrange hospice care for her, explaining to me what she was doing. I did point out to my mom that she realized how difficult this was for me. But my favorite story is my ex-wife, Jan, and I drove from the Washington, D.C. area to see my mom, really for the last time, we thought. And my mother loved Hershey's chocolate, being a Depression-age person. And we brought a big bag of Hershey chocolates, and the nurse freaked out and said, "You can't give that to your mom." And we asked why, and she said, "Well, who do you think's gonna clean it up?" And I quietly just went from the room and found our hospice nurse and told her what was going on. And the hospice nurse came by my mom's room and stuck her head in the door and told the other nurse, "Miss Cameron can eat all the chocolate she wants." My father died 22 years ago. He had emphysema. He was constantly on oxygen, couldn't walk a block without having to stop and breathe heavily. He decided he didn't want to live like this, and he always told his friends, I'm ready to die, I'm ready to die. Well, while he was alive, to bring humor to it, because his friends complained about it, he made up Kevorkian coupons to pass around. What my father chose to do, as a heart patient and emphysema, he stopped taking his drugs and he died. And when I arrived in Wilmington, the coroner told me that my father had a smile on his face. We have now entered another round of the great debate between sanctity of life and the quality of life. Carry it deeply enough and it may illuminate what life means to you. A most worthy journey to begin a Sunday morning. To whom one's life belongs lies at the crux of the dilemma. Some historical background may be helpful. In more primitive societies than our own, death has been understood as Thoreau understood it in our opening words, to be a natural part of life. If someone who was ill or injured should ask for aid in dying, out of respect, aid would be given. In Western civilization, a tolerance of suicide began with the Greeks. To the Romans, in turn, living nobly meant dying nobly. The classical attitude towards suicide as a release from unbearable suffering is reflected in Seneca's concise and enduring observation that, and I quote, "It makes a great deal of difference whether a person is lengthening his or her life." The emergence of Christianity marked a dramatic shift in attitude. Doris Pitwood, in her book, Common Sense Suicide, The Final Right, explains, and I'm quoting, "The early Christians brought a new attitude towards suicide by taking a fanatic delight in the prospect of instant salvation. There was no shortage of candidates for the four tortures of the arena. A martyr's death meant a reserved seat among the blessed in heaven. And they walked willingly, men, women, and children, into situations, often deliberately provoked situations that meant not only death, but death of a most grim variety." I'm sorry, I lost the scrolling. I'm back. The early Christian church, in turn, applied the brakes to this fatal practice by imposing increasing strictures on any form of voluntary death. Life was a gift of God and not to be given away, Augustine declared. Centuries later, Thomas Aquinas detailed the matter. He declared that suicide is contrary to natural law, damaging to human community, symbolic of humans assuming divine prerogatives concerning decisions of life and death, and the most mortal of sins, since it left no opportunity for repentance. Then came the Renaissance, which people began to restore people to their sense of individuality. Meanwhile, scientific discoveries gave rise to innovative methods for treating disease. Efforts to keep patients alive, however, often caused futile suffering. So Francis Bacon insisted that doctors should help dying patients, and I quote, "to make a fair and easy passage from life." A fair and easy passage from life. In the same decade that Bacon wrote those words, 1647, a word was coined for it, euthanasia, literally, a well or good death. The Euthanasia Society of America, the first of its kind in the nation, was founded in 1938 by Charles Francis Potter. He was a maverick Baptist minister who left that fold to become Unitarian. 3 years earlier, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, feminist reformer and Unitarian, had given eloquent testimony to the cause. And these her last words, typed by herself at age 75. A last duty. Human life consists in mutual service. No grief, no pain, no misfortune or broken heart is excuse for cutting off one's life while any power of service remains. But when all usefulness is over, when one is assured of an imminent and unavoidable death, it is the simplest of human rights to choose a quick and easy death in place of a slow and horrible one. Public opinion is changing on this subject. The time is approaching when we shall consider it abhorrent to our civilization to allow a human being to lie in prolonged agony, which we should mercifully end in any other creature. Believing this choice to be of social service and promoting wider views of this question, I have preferred chloroform to cancer. 2 decades after these words were written, Unitarian Universalist minister Donald McKinley wrote the first model of a living will. The most commonly raised concerns about voluntary euthanasia are fears of a slippery slope. Even the smallest step is dangerous. Once a license to kill is given, where will it stop? Leaders of the disabled are particularly concerned by the implication that there is any such thing as life not worth living. For those who stress the sanctity of life, life itself has intrinsic value and deserves our infinite respect. Under no circumstances are we in a position to judge its quality or its necessity. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church and others who bespeak this view are then driven to stress the redemptive value of suffering. They argue that pain enriches life. This strikes me as arrogant when it is imposed on others. How dare I claim suffering to be your privilege? When I stop to consider this claim that pain enriches life, I find that Jean Humphreys' words come back to haunt me. Derek, I simply don't want to go on living like this. It's been pretty bad this week, and I want you to do something for me, so that if I decide I want to die, I can do it on my own terms and exactly when I choose. In contrast to those who stress the sanctity of life, Jean Humphreys' words promote the quality of one's dying and the right to choose it. While others would say her words simply promote murder, murder is murder in the eyes of the court. Mercy is not recognized. We may kill in war, we may kill killers, we may kill in self-defense, we may kill by accident, but we may not kill out of mercy. What does this say about us? Do we trust ourselves that little? We human beings are far and away the most dangerous animals alive. Clearly, we do well to be cautious. Our motives may always be suspect and mixed. Yet we must also find resources within us to be wise and brave. We must risk a better future on safer, higher ground. Those who proclaim the sanctity of life cite a passage, a favorite of mine, from Moses' last speech to the people of Israel. They were to enter the promised land without him, and he was about to die. I call heaven and earth to witness this day that I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life. For many, the pole star word in this passage is life. For me, it is choose. Choice is the bedrock on which our Unitarian Universalist principles are grounded in the banner of our heritage. It is the great gift that comes to us with life and the overarching responsibility. If choice is no redeemer, it remains a true friend and lifelong companion. In the spirit of true companions, I want it to stay with me as I die. Amen, and blessed be.
Thank you, Reverend Don, for those thoughtful and heartfelt words. Our closing hymn is, I think, appropriately, Precious Lord, Take My Hand, hymn 199. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead falls down. Hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When the darkness appears and the night draws near and the day is past and gone, at the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home.
Thank you, David. That, by the way, was Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite hymn. Our closing words are from a colleague of mine, John Corrado. It's entitled Prayer as We Grow Older. Dear tenderness at the heart of things, hold us close. Incline us to hold one another close. Our living plunges us from yesterday to tomorrow faster than we've ever been ready for. We were kids on the playground just a few minutes ago. Now look at us, kids in aging skin. The story we become with every second seems as though somebody is speed reading it. We hardly have time to bump against one another, let alone make real connections. We grab desperately for meaning in this haste we seem to be. Hold us, slow us down, give us at least a sense of pause. Help us see each day with grateful wonder, as if it were the first page of the story. Help us live each day in thoughtfulness, in thoughtful fullness, as if it were the last page of the story. Hold us, slow us, help us, but keep us going as long as we can. Amen, and blessed be.
May we all be free from suffering and the root of suffering. Namaste.
I think that any time Martin Luther King's favorite hymn is one of your favorite hymns, then you're in good company. And so we will have a reprise of Precious Lord as our postlude.